And thinking about a little history here, and I'd like to talk about that just a bit. I'm sitting in Washington, D.C., waiting and waiting. As a Kipling wrote, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, and I was tired. But the problem is I couldn't talk to anybody because no one could do anything. It was impossible to have anything done. We were stuck. It all was in the hands of 6 senators and 6 congressmen. I'm not quite right on that. 9 senators and 9 congressmen. 5 Democrats, 4 Republicans in the Senate, 5 Democrats, 4 Republicans in the House. That's what it was all about. The Senate was on my side. The White House was on my side. Volpe at the Department of Transportation on my side. Everything was on my side except one thing, and that was the House of Representatives. They were bitterly opposed to me because Volpe and the White House decided this little tiny Snarr plan, which didn't amount to hardly a hill of beans in the big scheme of things, was made part of the 1970 federal aid highway program in order to pay for this little tiny bit of money, which is just a tiny bit. They had said, let's break the trust fund. And the Congress, that is the House, for 15 years would not give in to cracking that trust fund. So, and you can't threaten them that you're going to veto the thing. The president's not going to veto it. President Nixon over just a little bit of money on the little tiny taking down some signs. So that was the problem. But nevertheless, I had my fingers crossed. Well, I wanted to talk about a man in history that I think was as about astute in politics as any man that I've ever read about, and that was Cardinal Woolsey. In terms of politics and its history of politics, I want to reference the story of Henry VIII, and the play was written by Shakespeare. But in that story, he sums up the life, the end of the life of Wolsey. And the poem is called The Fall of Cardinal Wolsey. Well, I'm going to start about the fall, then I'll go back a little bit, give a little background as to what really happened and why the fall. Farewell. A long farewell to all my greatness. This is the state of man. Today, he puts forth the tender leaves of hopes. Tomorrow, blossoms, and bears his blushing honors thick upon him. The third day comes a frost, a killing frost. And when he thinks, good, easy man, for surely his greatness is ripening, the frost, the killing frost, nips his root, and then he falls, as I do. Oh, how wretched is that poor man that hangs on princes' favors. There is betwixt that smile we would aspire to, that sweet aspect of princes. And also, there is ruin, and there is more pangs and fears than wars have. And when he falls like Lucifer, never to hope again. Vain pomp and glory of this world, I hate ye. Me, Cardinal Wolsey, who once tread the ways of glory and sounded all the depths of honor, but far beyond my depth of honor, my high-blown pride at length broke under me, and now has left me weary, old, and at the mercy of others. Cromwell, my friend Cromwell, listen to me. Listen, I charge thee, fling away ambition. By that sin, the sin of ambition, fell the angels. How can man then, in the image of his Maker, hope to win by it? Cromwell, love thyself last. Cherish those hearts that hate ye. Corruption does not win more than honesty. Still, in thy right hand carry gentle peace to silence envious tongues. Be just and fear not. Let the ends thou aimest at be thy countries, thy gods, and truth. Truth above all. Then if thou fallest, O Cromwell, thou fallest a blessed martyr. There. Take an inventory of all that I have. To the last penny, 'tis the king's. My robe, my goods, 'tis the king's. At this moment, my integrity is all I can pledge to heaven, and is all I dare now call mine own. Cromwell, had I but served my God with half the zeal I served my king, he would not, in mine old age, have left me naked to mine enemies. Farewell. Farewell to the vain hopes of the king's court. My hopes do now in heaven dwell. Well, who was Cromwell? He was the assistant to Wolsey for many years, and Wolsey was the number one man in Henry VIII's life while serving as king, and even prior to, for 2 decades, 20 years. And his power was unequaled in the history of England. Unequaled in the context of an administrator. First, he headed up the church. Second, he headed up all the court system, and he was the exchequer, all the money. He collected all the taxes. Thirdly, he was the one man that Henry leaned upon more than anyone else. That's who he was. And his right-hand man was Cromwell. Now he's advising Cromwell. Since I have fallen from power, be careful, Cromwell, because the same's going to happen to you. That's happened to me. It's only a matter of time. And you'll slip up along the way, and you're going to find yourself in my shoes. Well, of course, Cromwell didn't listen to him. And the king leaned upon Cromwell. And what happened was, and I might just add this, that when he finished with his lecture or advisement to Cromwell, he left. Wolsey left York, where he was, going back to London, and died. I think he was 57 years of age. He died. A broken-hearted man. Now, when collecting all the money, he made sure that the church got its share, and he made sure from the church's amount, he took the biggest chunk. And he enriched himself with many residences. And after the fall of Wolsey, Henry VIII went about to just see what Wolsey had been doing. He couldn't believe it. Hampton Court, for example, was the biggest, most luxurious building built in the Renaissance period, was Hampton Court. I'm talking about English buildings now. It was amazing. And Henry said, gee, look where I'm living, and look where Wolsey's been living. He's been in luxury compared with me. And so he discovered various residences. I can go on and on and on. I mean, he really did spend the money. But in the final analysis, it all ended up in the control of Henry VIII. That's why he says, take an inventory of all that I have. To the last penny, 'tis the king's. That was true. Now, what brought the fall down was that Henry, being married to Catherine of Aragon, she was Spanish, and she was smart. She was an elegant lady, and she was unable to bring forth a male heir. And they lived together for many, many years, about 18 years. But he realized that it's not going to work. I got to find me a male heir. And so in that context, his eyes started to rove. And there were 2 girls in the court, Mary and Anne Boleyn. Mary was the oldest. They'd both been in France for many years. Their father had sent them there to refine them and to teach them how to dress, beauty, and all good courtly manners and so on. Well, he saw Mary first. She was the oldest. Anne was a little bit younger. And that went on for about 4 years. And then he realized, I got to get a divorce. And so what he did was he turned to Wolsey. Get me a divorce from the Pope. Well, Wolsey, being the head of the Catholic Church and the legate from the Pope, that is, everything that happened from the Pope to England had to all go through Wolsey. And it did. Well, in that process, to shorten things up, he was unsuccessful. Now, he worked at it for about 7 years, trying to get that divorce. In the meantime, Henry became very impatient. And so his eyes went from Mary and finally to Anne. Now, people think that the reason that the king, Henry VIII, wanted a divorce was so he could marry Anne. He'd fall in love with Anne. That's not the case at all. The reason he wanted the divorce was because Catherine of Aragon could not supply him with a son. So he ends up getting the divorce, and then he marries Anne Boleyn. She produces a daughter, and she is named Elizabeth. The king was cold to both of them after that, greatly disappointed. Well, Anne Boleyn made the great mistake that many women make, frankly, is that she forgot who the king was. And she started to meddle too much into his world and didn't stay within her own world. And she had started to develop enemies because she was too self-assertive. Well, they talk about she was fiddling around with some men. I don't believe any of that. I am convinced that this was the real answer. And he got upset to the degree that she lost her head. Now, he got an act of Parliament that his daughter Elizabeth would never become a queen. And that passed. Elizabeth was so smart, by the time she was 18, she could speak Greek, Latin, Spanish, French, and English, 5 languages. She was literally a genius. She was that precocious. Unbelievable. And she inherited from her mother and father their strength. That's where she was. So she was extremely formidable, an amazing human being. But he isolated her. Now he focused on another lady. Her name was Jane Seymour. Now, Jane Seymour was the perfect wife for Henry VIII. She was feminine, delicate. She was very supportive. She had the proper bloodlines, and she was somewhat plain, but she was wonderful all the way through. Like Socrates said, I pray thee, Lord, to make me beautiful from within. That was Jane Seymour, beautiful from within. He loved her. He loved her more than any of his wives, was Jane Seymour. Well, she gave birth to a son. That son cost her her life. She died in childbirth. Just broke Henry's heart to lose this wonderful woman that was his wife. Now, the son was highly spoiled, rightfully so, and properly trained. Got the very best of everyone to work with this boy teach him to be a king. Worked beautifully. But he died at 16 of consumption. Now, at the death of Jane Seymour, he had to marry again. He was lonely. I've got to marry again. And I better get me another son. Well, when he married again, the son of Jane Seymour was still alive, but in poor health, consumption. Well, what happened was that the advice that Cromwell received from Wolsey, he overextended himself. And he recommended to the king that he marry Anne Cleves. She was from Holland. And they sent the court painter over, painted her picture, brought it back, but he exaggerated her beauty. And so when they finally meet, which, by the way, she had to come all the way across the English Channel, and that first night in bed, he reaches over to touch her, but he can't do it. He pulls his hand back. The next day, he says to what have you done? She stinketh. She's not smart. She's dumb. I don't like her. The marriage is to be annulled. And so it was. The marriage was never consummated. But he gives her a nice palace to live in and supports her till the day she died. So that was good. Now, the next one was Catherine Howard. Now, Catherine Howard was British, English, quite young, beautiful, gorgeous, but a dingbat. And she messes around with her old boyfriend. She loses her head. The next one is Jane Parr, or I should say Catherine Parr. Catherine Parr was a gift from God to Henry VIII. What she did was she brought the family together. So with Catherine of Aragon, she had a child, a woman, a girl I should say, Mary. And brought Mary together. And then she brought from Anne Boleyn, here we have Elizabeth. Then she brings together her brother, half-brother I guess you call it, and Frederick. And then she brought together, I believe that was the four right there. Bring those four together. That saved the family. That was very, very important. And from that, Mary, because Frederick died. He died after being king. He was 10 years of age when Henry VIII died. But he died when he was 16. Also, amazing 16. And that was a very, very sad thing. So then the next one in line is Mary from Catherine of Aragon. Mary. And Mary was Catholic all the way. And Mary became known as Bloody Mary in history, Bloody Mary, because she wanted to reestablish the Catholic Church. You see, what happened was that an act of Parliament established Henry VIII, when he couldn't get that divorce, as the Pope of the Church in England, as well as the king of his dominion. So he held both titles. And from that came the Church of England. So rather interesting how that all happened. But then the real problem became, now what? Who's going to be the next monarch when Jane Seymour's son died? Well, it fell upon Elizabeth. Now, I cannot mention Elizabeth enough. I was in London several years ago. It was the year 2000. I was in London. In the newspaper, in the London Times, they had the lead article, who was the single most important person in the last 1,000 years? And they had 5 eminent British figures answered that, each in their own way. I was intrigued by one. He said the most important person in the last 1,000 years, frankly, was America's Declaration of Independence. Now, they had to give 2, answer 1 and 2. Number 2, he said, is also America's Declaration of Independence. Now, I can't remember 3 of them, but I can remember what Paul Johnson wrote. And Paul Johnson, I believe, is the greatest living historian in the world today. It's my personal opinion. I have a lot of his books, as many as I can find and get my hands on. I've got in this house. He said the most important person was Elizabeth I, the daughter of Henry VIII. Now, because of what she did, she never married. She maintained that she was married to only the English subjects, but not to a man. She would not permit her life to be marginalized. She was the queen, and she was going to remain that way until the day she died. And she was also known as the Virgin Queen. Now, a number of things that she did, but to single out a couple that I think are very important, and then we can move on. Number 1, she defeated the Spanish under her rule in the Spanish Armada. So then Spain, instead of being the dominant, most powerful nation in the world, that changed like that. It was now England. And from that, what she did was this. The Spanish, when they settled and started to move in and take control of South America, etc., what they did was they went for gold only. Gold, 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 gold. And therefore they enriched the monarchy in Spain. And the monarchy was interested in that. But Elizabeth was smarter than all of them. She said this, I will not put up any money. You go settle North America, but I'm not going to finance it. You go to the city of London, which would be our Wall Street in America, and you get the money. All I'm going to want is just a percentage, and it was very reasonable, of the take. So what they did was they invested in North America, in roads, in all kinds of things, in getting land, growing cotton and growing this, and all kinds of projects. They invested in North America to make money. So she allowed the people of England to benefit from North America directly, as she did directly. So she wasn't selfish. She was magnanimous and gracious in all aspects. Now that determined the difference. So when these colonies were settled, it was agreed that these American colonies, that they could each write their own constitution. So each colony wrote its own constitution, and each one had its own parliament. Now, she only said that what we will do is we will determine who the governor's going to be. Now, in exchange for that, we will protect those colonies with our navy and our army from the French and from the Spanish. We'll protect them. And she did. So she laid the foundation for America to grow. And without her, where would we be today? So when the Constitution of the United States was drafted, all Madison did was just take all 13 of these individual constitutions and brought them together under one. Therefore, he had the support of all the states in doing so. And that's what brought about, I think, America being America. Well, what brought on the Revolutionary War was that they were losing money. It cost too much money to supply the Navy and the protection of the armies to protect these colonies. So they wanted a more fair, equitable share of the take. And the way they considered we should do that is through taxation. And the Americans revolted against it. And that brought on the Revolutionary War. Well, I think I've told enough of the story. And so that you get a picture of it, how great she really was. Now, Margaret, who was Henry VII had 4 children, Arthur, Henry, Margaret, and Mary, 4 children. From Margaret came Mary, Queen of Scots, from that line. And so that when Elizabeth died, she had no children. Who was going to assume the power? They went back to the 3rd child, Margaret, and her posterity. She married a Stuart in Scotland. And from that line came James I, who was James VI, the King of Scotland, but James I in England. And that brought the amalgamation of Scotland and England under one rule. And that first ruler under these 2 separate countries became James I, the King of Scotland, James VI. That's what brought these 2 countries together, following the death, of course, of Elizabeth. And from James I, we get the King James Version of the Bible. And he retained Protestantism in England as well as in Scotland.